All right. So, couple of things that I want to do here tonight. What I definitely wanted to go ahead and do for sure is I definitely wanted to talk to you about who I thought was the best conference in college football. And I'm looking at this from a pure depth perspective. That is how I'm looking at this these tier rankings, and I'm gonna shout out the tier maker, by the way, because that's what we're gonna use in terms of figuring out what would be the best conference in America. So, how did we decide who was actually the best conference in all of America? Now, Conference USA only has 9 teams, unfortunately. And because Conference USA only has 9 teams, when we were looking at these conferences, we looked at, well, what is your best team? 1 through 9. How do they stack up against each other? Where do you stand among the power rating model that we have here on the channel? And you could say what you want about the power rating model, but the power rating model right now does have a winning season on its hand. They are is total 12 games over 500, and it's the first time as well that we've had this model. And the fact that we're looking at a winning season for the model potentially, I think that's really cool to see. So, that being said, let's go ahead and jump right into it. We'll start with the first tier. We have 4 tiers: elite, good, solid, you're all right, and then just trash. Just general trash. So, that being said, let's jump right into it. Starting with our trash tier. We got 2 conferences in here. Now, how I have this organized within the tier is if you're like closest, like to the left, then I have you as the best conference within that tier. So I do have the MAC better than Conference USA over the course of this season. But it's closer than I thought it's going to be. Comparing the top 9 teams in each conference, the Conference USA just has no room for error. And they have no room for error is because, well, they have the least number of teams in their conference compared to the other FBS conferences. And how it turned out is, Liberty obviously is the best team in Conference USA, but they were really the only top 50 team in the power rating system. Liberty ended up finishing 47th in our power ratings for the regular season. All the other teams, New Mexico State, Jacksonville State, and Western Kentucky, they were outside of our top 50. And then Mid-Tennessee State, Sam Houston, UTEP, Louisiana Tech, and FIU, well, they all finished outside of the top 100. But because they did have Liberty, they were able to give the MAC a run for their money. Because if you inserted Liberty in the MAC, in my opinion, Liberty would be favored over any team in the MAC. But the difference in why the MAC is just a hair bit better than the Conference USA, it really comes down to that depth. And it helps that you have, extra teams in your conference compared to Conference USA. I think that really, truly does matter in that regard. Because Miami of Ohio, they're not a top 50 team. In Miami, we do have as our new best team in the MAC, given what they did to Toledo. And we actually did call Miami beating Toledo ultimately. Miami, it was number 62. So it's not, they didn't have a strong one. Like their best team in their conference in the MAC doesn't stack very well compared to other conferences. But they had some good depth. I mean, it was a very interesting conference to cover this year. Toledo was 75. Bowling Green was 78. Ohio was 91. So there's certainly some solid teams in the MAC. They did have plenty of teams outside the top 100, though. So that's why I do have the MAC and Conference USA in this trash tier. Conference USA is number 10. MAC is number 9. Then I want to jump into the next tier, which is solid tier. There's a bigger gap between the good tier and the solid tier. The depth of Group of 5 conferences is not going to hold water compared to the depth of, say, Power 5 conferences. And this is the last time that we'll use that Power 5 framework. Because even if we go to Power 4, that's really not true, because the SEC and Big Ten are just going to be on a whole nother level compared to the ACC and the Big 12. So there's going to be a gap there, I would imagine, unless something crazy happens. But we have 3 conferences in this solid tier: the American, the Sun Belt, and the Mountain West. Now, the Mountain West was actually a very fun conference to actually go ahead and cover this year. We have the Mountain West as our number 8 conference in America. Now, why do we have the Mountain West as a number 8 conference? And it was actually really close between this one, the American, and the Sun Belt. Boise State was in the top 25. We have them power rated number 24, and was just better depth across the board. But they still had a couple of teams that were just not able to crack that top 100. Utah State and Colorado State is baked into this, and they're not top 100 teams, in my opinion. It also doesn't help that Fresno State faded the way that they did, and the same thing could also be said about Air Force. But overall, a solid year for the Mountain West. It was fun to definitely watch the Mountain West. Sun Belt, we have at number 7. Sun Belt, we saw Troy in this top 25. James Madison was also pretty close as well. So the Sun Belt with James Madison was like a top 35 to 40 team. It was extraordinarily close. But the reason the American gets to 9 in this solid tier, and we have the American ultimately as that best Group of 5 conference, is that we believe the best Group of 5 team is in this American Conference. The SMU, we have them power rated number 19 in the entire country. They would give most Power 5 teams a run for their money, in my opinion. Plus, you also have Tulane, for example, who we never saw ranked at any particular point. But what we did end up seeing was that even when they were never ranked by any means, Tulane was actually pretty close. They were actually pretty close to being ranked. And UTSA, we thought UTSA was pretty good too. Memphis was a top 60 team as well. Just a very good middle of the pack for the American this season. So not only do they have the higher echelons of, well, what we saw with SMU, but, Tulane was also really good. UTSA certainly surprised, even after their incredibly slow start. Memphis was good too. So we think the American's the best Group of 5 conference. So then after that, we have the other conferences in the Power 5. So this is what 2 through 5 is for me. So the Pac-12, we do have as the second best conference in America. And we think Oregon is the best team in the country. But when you get outside the top 25, there is a little bit of a drop-off after that. And that's why it's just so hard to keep up with the SEC, is that sure, your top, maybe in a particular year, could be better than the SEC's top. And I think that's the case here. Like Oregon and Washington, collectively, I would have favored over Georgia and Alabama. I know that's a pretty hot take, but the Pac-12 was really good this year. It's always been extremely competitive. So the Pac-12 we do have is our second best conference. ACC, I thought the ACC had a really good year as well. In the ACC, we have them as our third best conference in America this year. Florida State in particular, we have in the top 10, but there was some other teams in here as well that were in the top 30, even though we didn't see them ranked. Like Virginia Tech was very close to being ranked in our power rating system this week. Also, the same thing could be said for Duke, even without Riley Leonard constantly playing. We thought Duke was really close. And then Louisville, even though they're no longer power rated in the top 25, Louisville number 30 in the entire country. Plus, Miami's played some good ball. North Carolina's played some solid football as well. And Georgia Tech's our ninth best team in the ACC. Surprised some people this year. Georgia Tech, one of those teams that you never know what you're going to get. 1 week, they end up losing to Bowling Green of all people, and then they actually give Georgia a run for their money. So Georgia Tech just was really fascinating team. You never know what you're going to get from Georgia Tech. They're an interesting, bold team to watch. Either way, ACC and the Pac-12, they all have 9 teams ranked in the top 50, and that leads on to our next conference that I wanted to go ahead and talk about, and that is the Big 12. The Big 12, we actually do have as the 4th best conference, or the second worst Power 5 conference in the country over the course of this season. We know about Texas. Texas in the college football playoff, and they absolutely deserved it. But not a lot of star power after that necessarily. You know, Kansas State and Oklahoma, 12 and 13. Kansas and Iowa State was in the top 25, but a couple of surprises here. How about UCF? UCF finding a way to go bowling. We have them power rated as the 40th best team in the country. They do have a team outside of the top 50 in Oklahoma State, and that is deserved and warranted after their poor showing against the Texas Longhorns. However, I do want to give a quick shout out to West Virginia. They were the 8th best team in the Big 12, according to our power ratings, and they had a very good season, a very under-the-radar season, but a very good season. And then you got the Big 10. Big 10, I think, is going to be the worst Power 5 league in the country this year. And the Big 10, it's not that there was no competition, but it was very top-heavy, more top-heavy than any of the other leagues. The Big 10, in our opinion, you saw our power ratings, we have obviously some very strong teams in Michigan, Ohio State, and Penn State. But the drop-off was immense. Iowa was our 4th best team in the Big 10. They weren't even in our top 25. They weren't even there. And the drop-off continues. There is just a lot of mediocrity in the Big 10 after that. So that's why we have the Big 10 as our worst Power 5 league. There's too much of a gap between Penn State, Ohio State, and Michigan. And, you know, the additions of Washington, Oregon, and the LA schools, that's really going to help. But just not there this year, in my opinion. And then the number 1 league in the country. Now, I want to acknowledge, even though they're in a tier of their own, the gap between the SEC and the rest of the country this year, it is not as big as what people may come out to be. I kind of did like a cross-country style storing. So the SEC, with its top 9 teams, accounting for where they were in our power ratings, the SEC scored 188 with their top 9. And then second place was the Pac-12 with 238. So there was a 50-point gap between the SEC and the Pac-12, which when you're considering 9 teams, that's not very significant. But the SEC, even though their top wasn't as good as what we typically see them over the years, Georgia won some games ugly more often than usual. Alabama won some more games more often than usual this year as well. But what helps the SEC was their depth. So even in their 8th or 9th best team in the SEC, they're still all ranked in that top 35 and would still be ranked over the majority of teams in the country. That's just what the power ratings told me. So this is what my tier maker system ended up being for this year. Let me know what you guys think in terms of what my tier maker is looking like. Do you agree with this? Do you disagree with this? let me know down in that comment section. But even though I do not like the SEC, I have a bias against the SEC, if we're being honest with you guys. I'm going to be real with y'all. But I do believe that the SEC was the best conference in the country. I just don't think that gap is as immense as what some people make out to be. I think hopefully that makes sense. I'm probably going to be roasted for that in the comment sections. But